Serious conflict can come from all sorts of sources. We would like to think that it doesn't happen, but occasionally there is gross misconduct, you know, in a workplace, which will breach the code of conduct and breach the organisational values to such an extent that that person has to be let go. We can also have unresolved conflict that's built up over time. I think the worst case of workplace bullying that I have ever dealt with was a fellow in an organisation who bullied his immediate superior, and it occurred over a 9-year period, but the leadership in that organisation did not really have the courage or the wherewithal or the know-how to actually tackle it. So by the time I got to it, things were pretty toxic. And sometimes there is a pattern of behaviour that has not been addressed. So I would come into an interesting workplace and it sticks out like the nose on the face that this person has been causing problems for a long time, but no one's tackled them, you know, because again, and it's not because, it's not really about refusing to be able to do it, but it's having the skill set and the mindset, I think, to do that. The other piece to remember too is where you've got gross misconduct or a very, very difficult person who's had to be let go, that an intelligent, an emotionally intelligent leadership team would make sure that the needs of the walking wounded have been addressed, you know, post that person leaving, because unless there's some sort of resolution about that, it simply won't happen and people will remain scarred. The priorities in the wake of serious conflict, or as a result of serious conflict, are twofold as far as I'm concerned. One which involves HR, which is about, you know, managing the risk to the organisation so that the fallout doesn't come back to bite them. And also so that means letting someone go has to be done, you know, within the confines of policy and so on. But the other piece is really about addressing the harm to individuals, yeah, and that if let go, again, if it's ignored, the organisation will suffer in all sorts of respects. But basically what we regard as a restorative approach views misconduct, and if we're talking about workplaces, not as a breaching of the code or breaking of the rules, but clearly it is, but rather we focus on what damage has been done, what violations have occurred to people and relationships. And once those violations occur, given that the productivity in a workplace is largely based on the quality of the relationships between people, then there's an obligation and liability to step up to do something about that. And the thing I love the best about this restorative approach to problem solving is really the fact that it's pointed in the direction of healing and making things right to the extent that that's possible. Typically, the process in the justice system is called a restorative conference in a workplace. That process is called a workplace conference, but it involves identifying the community of people who are affected by the problem, because we believe that the people who are in the problem are the ones who understand it the best. Once that community of people is identified, then there are a series of interviews that are completed by an independent facilitator or someone who's neutral to the problem. This could be in-house neutrality, but you still have to be like Switzerland for that. And so the questions that are asked of people in the interviews are the ones that I mentioned before. So, you know, tell me about what this problem has been like for you. What have you thought at these moments as it's unfolded? How's it impacted on you? What's been the worst of it? What do you think a way forward might be? So the facilitator gets inside people's heads and hearts about what's happening and then brings them together in dialogue. And that dialogue is an exhausting business actually for people because they're not used to it. Yeah, but if we allow people to metabolise the bad stuff that they're sitting on and can put that to one side, then we can engage the intellect in problem solving around the issues that have been revealed. I think probably one of my favourite stories is about that involves leadership and HR, and it was a serious case of bullying within a food manufacturing factory where a new financial controller was brought in to bring in sweeping changes to the systems in the whole factory, but he was a shocker. And HR began to hear about it because individuals would come and say, I just need you to know about X. Please don't do anything because I know I'll be punished if he knows that I've said something. But eventually there was a pattern that emerged, and then the senior leadership within the organisation got involved, and he was asked to fall on his sword, and he left, and we hear sometime later that he's off to the next job doing exactly the same thing. So because he was let go before being held accountable, there was no learning for him. And we did a workplace conference in the wake of his resignation, bringing together basically 3 teams of people: the people he'd so deeply offended, the people he'd hired who thought, you know, he was God's gift to the universe, and management. And I tell you what, both the older staff who had been treated so badly and the newer staff both hated management because management had failed them. So, you know, it was interesting, and the smiley thing that happened for me out of all of that was that I was asked to sit in on the final interviews for his replacement. So I was able to ask some fairly pertinent questions about the resolution of staff type issues for the person who eventually was selected successfully. So it did have a happy ending in the end, but some of the behaviours were appalling, and no one seemed to have the skills around holding someone responsible and accountable. Well, the broad lessons for me around organisational health, really, that have been taught to me by my immersion in the restorative field is really about creating, and this is the preventative piece, creating policies and practices and protocols that are pro-relationship, so that there's an honouring of the glue that holds us together, and an honouring of an agreement that we will come together to work it out, because the relationship piece is so critical to the success of the organisation. So, you know, strengthening the relationships, getting people to work together in mutually interesting and enjoyable ways, so that actually when there is a problem, it's just a part of the culture that we sit down and talk about it. So we keep the small things small.